One of the best parts of the R6 and really mirrorless cameras in general is the amazing autofocus system. And one of the things that makes this autofocus system so amazing is the touch and drag feature, which some people absolutely hate, which I think there's just a misunderstanding of its capacity, what it can do for you, and how it can actually help you be a better photographer. So I'm gonna break down my 5 best practices, some tips that will allow you to be able to use touch and drag in a way that feels right, and it feels like you're in control, and it's not something that you avoid using when you use your new camera. So the first thing you need to do is make sure you have your settings correct. So I have an entire episode on my YouTube channel where I dove into very detailed about my R6 autofocus settings. So you should definitely check that out. When it comes to settings specifically for touch and drag, I do have a few recommendations. Okay, so first things first, you have to go into your touch and drag settings and you need to enable touch and drag. Second thing is where it says active touch area at the bottom of the list of touch and drag settings, I choose to use the top settings. The whole top half of my LCD screen is where I can use my thumb to grab onto that point and make it move. I like using the top because it's the closest to where my thumb naturally hits. And I don't have massive man hands, so I can't reach all the way across to the other corner. And I didn't like using the top right corner because it just didn't seem like enough surface area to really grab it as quickly as I wanted to. So as long as my thumb is reaching across the top half of this screen, it's going to enable me to move my AF point around. And I have tried out a lot of different methods. This is still the #1 setting that I feel like works best for me. So the second thing is when it comes to positioning method, you want to select relative and not absolute. And it took me a while to understand the difference between these two, but now I fully understand you want your touch and drag area to stay relative based on the orientation of what your camera is. So when you select the top portion as your area where you're going to connect with the touch and drag, if you have it on relative, then when you're shooting horizontally, everything from this middle line and up is where you can access the touch and drag option. If you turn it vertically and you have relative selected, then now you can use right here as the top of the screen instead of it being absolute. Absolute would mean for me, it would be a lot harder to access my touch and drag vertically if that was selected. So this is the third setting that you need to change. Your orientation linked AF point needs to have separate AF points selected. The reason why this is so important is because your camera will remember the last place your AF point was for that orientation. So when you go back to it, your AF point is closer to where you would actually want it to be. So this is important because if I'm shooting horizontally, then my AF point is somewhat naturally going to be in the top middle area, somewhat. And then you go to vertical, it's going to stay up in the somewhat top quadrant of your screen, so normally where your client's faces would be. And this is important for touch and drag because it allows you to not have to do so much movement from scratch. Like you're already having your camera set up your AF point close to where you want it, so you're not reaching with touch and drag all the way over to the bottom left of your screen to pull it back to where you want it. So this seems maybe at first like it's not interconnected because it's not even under the panel of touch and drag settings, but it's important because they all play together in order to make this process work seamlessly. All right, so tip and best practice #2 is you want to make sure you do your framing first and then you move your AF point second. This seems so basic, but the reason why this is important is because this is utilizing the technology and the advancement of this system that you're using. I couldn't do this back in the day. With my DSLR, I have an idea of the framing and then I'd have to focus and recompose. Those days are gone, and now I can just look through my camera, I know exactly what I want to shoot, I line it up, I frame it perfectly, and then I use my thumb to move the AF point exactly where I want to focus. It's one of the greatest, I think, advancements of my journey from DSLR to the R6 is being able to do that. Someone who loves composition, this is a game changer. If you feel like, oh gosh, touch and drag is taking up way too much time, it could be that you're getting this tip a little out of order. It could be that you're trying to move your AF point and then you're figuring out how to frame it and then you're finessing where the point is. And then all of a sudden you have like all these multiple steps you don't actually need. For me, I'm looking through my viewfinder and I'm aligning and I'm figuring out, okay, I want their faces here, perfect, the veils this way, that's awesome. I'm gonna keep them right like this. I'm just gonna move that right to the eyes and I'm gonna snap and be done. So just knowing that order, I think is a game changer. Out of all of these tips, I think this one could potentially have the biggest impact for you. So don't miss this one. Definitely put this into practice the very next time you are trying out touch and drag. Okay, the third tip is if you find yourself in a pinch, use your touch screen to immediately lock in focus if you feel like you are not getting anywhere with touch and drag. I would say this happens to me maybe twice on a wedding day. And it doesn't scare me because I know this tip and I utilize this tip. But if something's happening really fast and it is just, a candid moment that I'm like, oh gosh, and I'm trying to drag it really quickly. Sometimes it's better just to look at your camera and tap and shoot as it's happening instead of trying to get it up to your face and grabbing the point and moving it exactly where you need it to go. I would say that this is probably going to be a tip that applies to more so wedding photographers where you have moments that they're not going to wait for you, right? These are moments that are happening and you're not in control. So that's it's kind of like an emergency situation. It's a tip for the emergency situation with touch and drag. Just have it in your mind that you can always just pull your camera back and tap where you want to focus if you feel like you need to do it quickly and you're getting frustrated. One thing to be aware of is that as soon as you move your camera away from your face, you're kind of losing a point of contact, which could make it more prone to camera shake. So you want to make sure your shutter is in a relatively safe zone. I always say your longest focal length, double that, you should stay there. You want to make sure that is something you're aware of just because shooting like this is a little less risky than having your camera out like this. So, fourth tip is you want to make sure that you put the majority of the weight of your camera in your less dominant hand. So this is my shooting hand. I'm going to put the weight of the camera in this hand when I'm using touch and drag because it allows me to have this hand free to get my thumb over here, move it around. Just shooting like this, it's too hard. Maybe someone who has a much bigger hand could do it, but for me, using this hand to stabilize the weight of the camera allows me to move my AF point around very quickly and very easily. Final tip, fifth tip. We don't know how to title this one. It's a little bit strange. Just bear with me. The tilt of your head matters. There's a lot of people in our Facebook group that are like, my cheek or my nose is like messing up my touch and drag. And I realized that I've kind of like evolved into a new way of holding my camera. And so I don't deal with this anymore, but it's interesting. So I used to shoot kind of like this, where my like cheek is almost touching the camera. My nose is getting in the way. My eyelashes are getting in the way. But now when I'm shooting more like this. So I'm like actually tilting my head and looking up. So my eyes, when I'm looking through my camera, I'm like looking up like this instead of looking straight through it. Straight through it means that my whole face is coming towards the camera, but tilting like this means just my eyes going up to the viewfinder, and that has been a almost automatic and subtle change I didn't even realize I was doing, but it protects me from having my face affect touch and drag. And it gives my thumb more room to move around underneath my face. Does that make sense? A big way that I know that this is a shift is because if you look at the back of my Mark IV, my makeup that would have gotten on, it actually discolored this part of my camera from like oil on my skin and my face touching right here, but my R6 has none of that. And that's how I know I've made a shift because my face is no longer touching the camera screen. So a lot of these tips may seem so simple and like not on a large scale, like does this even matter? But the truth is, if you're even just missing one of these tips, it could make or break whether or not you like touch and drag, which really could make and break whether or not you even like your mirrorless camera. So for a lot of people who are struggling with touch and drag, I really hope this clears up a little bit of the issues that you could be experiencing. And the reason why we want to love touch and drag, the reason why I utilize touch and drag, and I couldn't fully benefit from the R6 unless I use this feature, is because I love composition and I can't fully utilize the composition that I see in my head without using this feature. It just allows me to pinpoint and touch and drag the point right exactly where I want that focal point to go. And if you're not utilizing it, then I would almost say, like, if you're not using touch and drag, you're missing out on maybe 50 to 70% of why mirrorless has been a game changer for me. For me, being able to take my AF point and put it anywhere in my frame that I want and being able to lock in focus right there, that is the sweet spot for me with mirrorless. That is what made me fall in love with this camera. So I wanted to share these tips in case there are people out there that are not quite sure if they love this feature or not. I hope this will encourage you to try some new things and figure out how to make it work for you. If you try all these tips and you're like, oh my gosh, my life has been changed, I would love to share what has happened, please do. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. We like reading them. I read some of them. Ty reads all of them. If you have any tips that helped you with touch and drag, you can share those as well. We love hearing from you guys. If you love this and you want to learn more about shooting mirrorless, my own journey, anything that you see happening on this channel, make sure you like and subscribe. Check the links below for any other resources that I could help you with. We have a lot of other free things that you can dive into to become a better photographer. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time. Bye.
Bye.